Okay, good morning, everybody. Dr. Pelz, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. I apologize, my internet connection may be a little spotty, I'm not sure. I live out in the middle of the boonies a little bit, so we're on a satellite, so that may or may not be a problem, hopefully not. And they're doing construction on the house, so we may have you may be hearing an occasional drill going off, but hopefully we'll get through it. But anyway, well, welcome. Can you do me a favor and just kind of tell us a little bit about your background for people that have not encountered you before?
Yeah, of course. So my doctorate is as a doctor of chiropractic, and I've been in practice for 25 years. And about 10 years into practice, I really started noticing that people were not healing and they weren't healing at the same rate. They were coming in with multiple symptoms, and there seemed to be something happening to the human body that I hadn't seen the first 10 years in practice. And so I started looking into what was poured into our foods, what the chemical exposures that we were getting. And I started to see how we needed more tools to allow the body to heal. And along that journey, I found fasting and the research on fasting and started to teach my patients to fast, took it to YouTube, started teaching people what the science behind fasting was. And for the last 3 years, I have been a fasting expert, teaching people how to fast, all different lengths of fast. One of my passions is especially teaching women how to fast. Women do need to fast differently than men. I love the science on fasting. And I would say currently I'm obsessed just in general with metabolic health, because I so clearly see how metabolic health is the path to us moving forward as a world. So so that's kind of where I sit now. And you can find my stuff on YouTube. That's where a lot of my my videos are and my teachings. And I hold free fasting once a week. We do a big fast training week where we allow people to practice different length fasts.
Yeah, I've certainly, and obviously there's people like Jason Fung and others who've popularized fasting. We have a lot of people within this community that utilize fasting as part of their strategy. Obviously you mentioned it, what we're seeing, and, clearly we're seeing more and more sick people. There's no doubt about it. I saw in my career, I'd see this more and more, just like things like ACL injuries in kids, which, before, that would be a pretty rare injury. Now it's becoming more common. And some people would say, well, the kids are doing these long sports camps, and really kids are less active than they've ever been, to be honest. And I think the food is just, turning the body to mush, to put
horrible. The food
direct.
is horrible. It's horrible. It's killing the human race.
Yeah, but let's delve in there a little bit before, because I know some of the women are here going to go, what do you mean women have to fast differently? I know that's something they want to talk about, but because you talked about, the food we're being exposed to, and some of it's, I hesitate to even call it nutrition or food itself. It's more like just processed food-like substances that we constantly eat. But what are you finding are the big problems with the current diet over the last, as it's progressed over the last few decades?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. We are not eating food. We are eating chemicals, inflammatory chemicals. So just if you walk into your grocery store, just stay away from the middle part of it, because that's where all the addictive chemical laden foods are. The top 3 worst ingredients that everybody should get off of is the inflammatory oils, all the bad oils, the refined carbohydrates. Get off of the processed breads and cakes and cookies. And this goes for gluten-free as well. Like, get off all of that stuff. And then get off the toxic ingredients, all the chemicals that are being put not only in those foods, but in our meats. We got to avoid those 3 basic food principles in order for our body to heal. Now, if you combine that with fasting, what's so flipping cool is that the research shows that just taking your food window and compressing it into something as simple as 10 hours of eating and 14 hours of fasting, and you can start to reverse the damage that these harmful foods have caused you over the years. So we remove those 3, We throw in something as simple as a 14-hour fast, and now we're undoing the damage of metabolic health.
So, I mean, there's obviously people that are critics of fasting, and I would imagine there's some people that will benefit more from it than others. Some people will say, well, the only reason fastings work is because it gets you into a caloric deficit, and if you don't achieve that, you don't really see any benefit. Are there benefits outside of caloric deficit with fasting? And then I guess the follow-up question would be, are there people that, well, we'll get into the differences in how different people would apply fasting. Like a diabetic might do it differently than someone suffering from some other issue. And you mentioned women are different than men, but what about the critics that say, hey, it's only about caloric reduction is the only reason fasting is efficacious?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I just want to point out that fasting is not calorie avoidance. You're not trying to, what you're doing is you're taking your food and you're compressing it into a shorter eating window, allowing more time for your body to fast. And it's not calorie deficit. It is being smart when you transition into eating smart foods. Now, let me tell you the research, what it's showing, and I'm going to fire off the main pieces and the main timeline of fasting that we start to see. When you fast 13 to 15 hours, you start to flip a metabolic switch. And you start to go from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. Most people, somewhere around 13 to 15 hours, this is the classic intermittent fasting. And you'll flip this switch and you are now burning energy, making energy from fat. So that's the first step. In this 13 to 15 hours, there's incredible research. Growth hormone goes up, that slows the aging process down. Inflammation starts to come down. Ketones start to be made that will go up and heal the brain. I mean, the list is endless. Once you hit about 17 hours of fasting, you start to stimulate, you turn on something called autophagy. Autophagy is where the cells will start to heal and repair themselves. It's a wisdom and intelligence inside the cells that make the cells more efficient. So if you you had been following a Western diet for many years, you're wanting to heal your body in a more efficient way, you're going to want to start to doing some longer fasts, like 17-hour fasts. Then we go to 24 hours. Research shows that you reboot intestinal stem cells in your gut, and you can start to repair the inner lining of your gut. There's an interesting study at 36 hours, we start to burn more fat. They did a research showing 36 hours of fasting and then 12 hours of eating. They did that for 4 weeks, just repeating that cycle, and all the metabolic markers started to improve. A1C came down, CRP improved, LDLs, total cholesterol. I mean, everything improved when they followed that path. 48 hours, we have research showing that dopamine receptor sites open up and you can actually create new dopamine pathways. And then we have Valter Longo's 3-day water fast that showed at 72 hours, you can reboot all of your old worn out white blood cells and create a new, stronger immune system. So those are kind of the highlights. So calorie restriction to me is more about, I'm just going to eat less. I'm not saying eat less. I'm saying eat less often, and take your eating window, compress it, and start to use the intelligence inside your body to be able to heal some of the damage that this modern world is creating. And the longer you go out without food, the more we're seeing these healing switches being turned on.
What about, for someone who's relatively healthy already? I mean, somebody who's, at a happy, stable, healthy body weight that isn't suffering from any significant comorbidities. I mean, is there any benefit to fasting for them? Can it be detrimental? Can fasting be detrimental for people? Is there any thought on that?
Yeah. So let me answer the first question, and then I'll go to the detrimental piece. So, if you are healthy, I'll put myself in that category. Healthy 51-year-old woman. I fast all the time with the exception of right before my cycle. And I'll explain how we look at this for women. But I'm doing it for better mental health. I'm doing it for mitochondrial health, so I can keep my cells clean and energized. I'm doing it for cancer prevention. So the thing that I do that a lot of people are not realizing, and this is a lot of what I teach on my YouTube, is that I vary my fasts. I don't fast the same way every day, and I don't fast every day. And we can chat about that in a moment. But varying the length of your fast, a lot of people who fell in love with Jason Fung's original work that came out of the obesity code, they became 1 meal a day people, and they just did the same meal over and over and over again. That's not how the body was meant to be either. We were meant to have a little more variation in that. The second part of, and I mean, there's so many reasons to do it for prevention, so many. And even in the cleanest world, if you're going out to eat at a restaurant, you're still getting chemicals. You go out and breathe the air, you're still getting chemicals in the air. I mean, I wish I could say it's as easy as just putting a stake in the ground and saying, I'm going to eat healthy, therefore I am healthy. Unfortunately, the modern world hasn't set us up for that yet. So as far as when is there a detrimental side? There's a couple of detrimental sides, and that's where people do the same style of fast over and over and over again. So these are the 1 meal a day people. About 6 months after Jason's book came out, they poured onto my YouTube channel, and women were saying their hair was falling out. People who started losing weight started gaining weight because they were just getting too rigid with fasting. So we need a little more fasting flexibility. The second person who struck the time or the area that fasting can be detrimental is for women right before their cycle. We're trying to make progesterone then, and progesterone's very susceptible to spikes in cortisol. And cortisol, fasting's like exercise. It can create an increase in cortisol, which ultimately can cause a woman to start to bring her progesterone levels down. That can make her miss cycles. So that would be then we can dive into that deeper, but that would be the second scenario. I think, there are people who have extreme adrenal fatigue. They've got to fast differently. Diabetics, amazing for diabetics, but we got to go slow and methodical about it. So there's a lot more nuance to fasting than just skip food. There's more to this than I think people initially realize when they come to fasting.
Yeah, and I think that's, we have a lot of, for whatever reason, we've seen that women seem to outnumber men in this community that we have, at least in this thing.
Awesome.
Although it seems like more folks that are men eat a carnivore diet. But let me ask you, so how do you approach women differently, both those that are still having menstrual cycles, and then you've got perimenopausal, postmenopausal women? How do those people differentiate in their fasting?
Yeah, great question. So let's start with women who have a normal cycle. If you have a normal cycle, the first part of your cycle, like day 1 until you ovulate, so that would be about day 10, day 11, your body is trying to make a hormone called estrogen. And you will be very efficient at making estrogen, specifically the protective estrogens, by keeping yourself insulin sensitive. So the longer fast, carnivore diet, getting yourself in ketosis in that first part of your cycle from day 1 to day 10 is imperative. That is when women should be leaning into the longer fast if she chooses to do that. Then when we hit ovulation, which is about this short little 4-day window from like day 11 to day 15, you've got all your hormones at their max. So you've got estrogen at its highest, you've got testosterone, and actually let me retract one part of that. Progesterone comes in a little bit then, but not a ton. So I actually encourage women to go stick closer to like a 15-hour fast at that point. Don't go crazy with fasting during your ovulation. So bring it back down. You can still stay in ketosis, although women need to be able to have a healthy gut to break down estrogen. So a carnivore diet would be phenomenal there. Get an upregulation of T regulatory cells so that you have like a calm, efficient immune system. Great during that time. Then when we come out of ovulation, you can go back into the deeper fast. You can go back there's a little 4-day window about day 16 to day 20 where you can fast a little deeper. But then day 21, your body's making progesterone and you stop fasting, and you don't want to be in keto. You want to lean into foods that are more focused on building progesterone. So these are not keto foods. These are more squashes and potatoes, and grass-fed beef is a great food for building up progesterone. But everything has to dramatically change in your cycle around day 20. So that's a typical for a woman with a normal cycle. When we put women into this, we call it the fasting cycle. We put them into a woman's fasting cycle. They can fast. I hate to say it like this, but they can fast like a man. And here's the thing is that men, when they go into fasting, they just drop weight, and, you pair that with the carnivore diet and boom, like your health will just go to a whole nother level. Women, we have to mind the cycle that I just showed. So if you are moving in and out of the different length fasts, like I explained, and you are avoiding fasting the week before your period, then losing weight will feel as effortless as it often feels for men. So we call it the woman's fasting cycle. So that's for a typical cycle. Now, perimenopausal women is the hardest one. So a perimenopausal woman can follow the same thing I explained if she has a cycle, but with perimenopausal women, you get these like 60-day periods, 90-day periods where you have no idea if your period is coming or going. With that person, she's going to need to know her progesterone levels and how to click in when her body is wanting progesterone. And it's actually not that hard for a perimenopausal woman. If she starts spotting and there's no official start to her period, that right there is a sign her body needs more progesterone. She needs to step out of fasting, and she needs to lean into the foods that I talked about. If all of a sudden her anxiety goes through the roof and she can't sleep, that would be another sign. Hey, your body's trying to make progesterone. Let's stop the fasting. So the perimenopausal woman is the hardest. And then because there's a lot of nuance, she's got to figure it out based off of clues that her body gives her. Then the last one is the postmenopausal woman. And for her, she really needs to just make sure 1 to 2 days a week she's not fasting, because she still needs to make progesterone. She's not getting as much of it as she did at 35. So 1 to 2 days a week, step out of fasting, step out of ketosis, so your body has enough resources to make progesterone.
Yeah, it seems like, you're mostly describing what would be called intermittent fasting. It's mostly within the day, these 15, 16 hours, which is, I pretty typically do that myself, just because I don't eat particularly late. And by the time if I eat breakfast, it's usually 12, 14, 16, 18 hours before my first meal. But somebody's asking about, there's women that have shorter cycles instead of the typical 28-day cycle. They're on she says an 18-day cycle. Is there something else going on that would be impacted by?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is you want to track your cycle. So I use a Clue app so that you kind of see where your ovulation window would be. And Clue app, if you track it for a couple of months, then it'll take your 18-day cycle and it will start to show you the ovulation period. And the real trick for somebody with an 18-day cycle, if we're going to keep it as simple as possible, is I would encourage you to not fast the 7 days before. So day 11, you would stop fasting. And once you start your cycle, I would actually encourage you to fast even longer than a typical intermittent fasting. I would encourage you to try a 24-hour fast. Try a 36-hour fast. Really, you can use that front end of your cycle, especially that first week, to get yourself more insulin sensitive. Now, the thing I don't know about this particular woman is if she's had an 18-day cycle her whole life. If she's had one her whole life, there's a very good chance that that's just her cycle. But if it's more recent, like in the last decade, there's a good chance it might be environmental. And if it's an environmental reason that your cycle is shorter, fasting is actually going to bring you more towards a 28-day cycle. So yeah, so she said it's recent. I see, Karen, I see your comment. Yeah, so then it'd be really interesting, Karen, to see if you just start to follow what, like I would do first week of your period, I would do deeper fast, more ketosis. And then you can kind of play with the second week. And then the week before, I would go into no fasting. Try that for a couple of months and you might see that your cycle gets longer.
Yeah, and just to continue with the questions here, there's somebody asking about if they've had a hysterectomy, but they kept their ovaries. Does that change anything significantly?
Yeah, it's another great question. So here's a really cool thing. There are two cells in two parts of our body that respond incredibly well to autophagy. And I want you to think of autophagy as you're just cleaning these cells up, making them more efficient. So the two parts of the body are the brain and the ovaries. The ovaries, on the outside, the ovaries have something called thecal cells. And these are the cells that are making you hormones. So if you had a hysterectomy where they pulled the uterus out, but they left the ovaries, that is awesome. And I would encourage you to make sure, and obviously you don't have a cycle anymore, but I would make sure if we took you on a weekly basis that at 4 to 5 days out of the week, I would have you fast 17 hours or more. So we're getting more autophagy in there. And then 2 days a week, I would step out of fasting and I would do more of the progesterone building foods that I talked about. And I would do that on a weekly basis. And you might find that your hormone production improves greatly. We've seen in our community, I've seen people with full hysterectomies that were told they would go into full menopause within 3 months of the hysterectomy. And 3 years later, they're still making sex hormones, and they don't have ovaries, but the tissue's still there. The adrenals will make sex hormones. So if fasting in that scenario can be an incredible tool to balance hormones.
All right. What about, there's people that are concerned that, fasting, particularly extended fasting or frequent fasting, might lead to some loss of muscle. Is there any concern around that? And if so, are there things you could do to mitigate it? Would strength training during this time, eating more protein, any of those things mitigate that?
Yeah. I'm so happy you asked me because this is recently came out. So here's how we look at fasting. When you want to heal your body, fasting is a go-to strategy, but it has to be paired with healthy eating. So when we go into autophagy, 17 hours of fasting and longer, what we're doing, autophagy is in opposition of a cellular mechanism called mTOR. mTOR will build cells up and make them healthy. They will build muscle. On the other end of that spectrum is autophagy. Autophagy will break down and heal, so it can break muscle down, but it's temporary. It is not the whole picture. So if you want to build lean, strong muscle, the absolute best way to do this is to go 17 hours of fasting on a regular basis and then break your fast with protein and protein only. If you break your fast with protein, what you're now doing is you're saying to your cells, okay, we've stimulated autophagy, we've cleaned ourselves up, now let's build ourselves strong. And let's go and add protein in to stimulate mTOR so we can build muscle up. Now, the next hack on this that's amazing is, why don't you fast on a regular basis, 17 hours, do a strength training workout in a fasted state. So you're breaking muscle down even more, and then have a big meat meal afterwards. Break that, like literally leave your workout and then go and eat a bunch of meat. And now that is the greatest way to build muscle. So when people say it breaks down muscle, it's like, yes, in the fasted state temporarily, but if we start adding in more protein and we break our fast with protein, now you're building muscle better than you ever built it before. So it's an incredible hack. And it frustrates me when recently there was a study that came out and everybody goes running from fasting, but they didn't go into the nuance of what they should do to actually use fasting to build muscle efficiently.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the study you're referring to is a recent study looking at alternate day fasting, and they saw, a loss of tissue, but it was both lean and fat tissue, whereas, the sort of the calorie restricted group did better at preserving lean muscle. And so it may have been how they how they implemented the fasting, I suspect. Is that your criticism?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That it's a recent study. And, if you take a bunch of people in a fasted state and you go, well, they broke muscle down and they lost muscle. Yeah, of course. That's your body's going to find glucose wherever it is. It's going to go after it in the muscle. It's going to go after it in your fat. It's going to go after it in your liver. And so it's going to break that down. Now, what are we doing after the fast? That's where we need to elevate the fasting conversation too. So that's exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, and because we have people fasting, I tell them you should be training and strength training while you're fasting, giving your body the signal to build, to preserve and build muscle. And during that time, you have to add those things. Let me ask you about, you'd mentioned autophagy kicking in at 17 hours. I've seen other things that stimulate autophagy, namely exercise might be a stimulant. So, I mean, if that's a good thing, which we believe it is, we're turning over the cells, we're cleaning out the quote unquote the cellular garbage and, rebuilding things. What other things, so outside of fasting and eating, I mean, are there other things that you would recommend people do?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing that most people don't realize is you're stimulating autophagy every night when you go to sleep. So when you sleep, your brain actually goes into a repair mode. This is why sleep is so important. So make sure you're prioritizing sleep, make sure you're getting enough sleep, because that's going to be a great way to stimulate autophagy. Then we throw in the 17-hour fast. And they say autophagy and fasting happens somewhere between 17 and 72 hours. So when people really want a deep cellular cleaning, that's part of why they go into those 72-hour fasts. But then to your point, we've got HIIT training where you're getting your heart rate up and down. That can stimulate autophagy. We have things like red light therapy, some biohacks like red light can stimulate autophagy. We've seen some, herbs that like bergamot that can stimulate autophagy. So it's not, you start stacking those things together. What I'm finding in my community is that a lot of people, as they're starting to go, I've been doing this all wrong. I've been eating wrong. I've been eating the wrong foods. I've been living wrong. And they start to wake up. Then what do they need to do to repair themselves? And the more we can start to stack autophagy habits and combine them, the quicker somebody's going to heal.
So as far as, you talked about sleep and eating, these 17-hour windows, do you find that the circadian biology plays a role in when you should eat outside of how frequently, but is it better to eat earlier in the day, later in the day? How does that typically?
It's another great question. Okay, so here's the way that I look at the eating window. I believe that the first step that all humans on the planet right now need to take is let's just stop eating all day. Like stop eating before you go to bed, stop eating when you wake up, doesn't matter what you're eating. We have to start to compress this eating window. Okay, so the research shows 10-hour eating window can overturn the damage that the metabolic syndrome type damage that's happening from food. So now we take this 10-hour eating window and we go, okay, well, where do I put it in my day? The best way to line it up is that the 2 hours before you go to bed, your body is making the most melatonin. And the 2 hours when you get up, your body is still making melatonin. Now, why this is important is because as melatonin goes up, your body becomes more insulin resistant. So if I eat dinner when it's dark, and by the way, to your point on circadian rhythm, if it's 6 o'clock at night and I see the sun setting, that red light stimulates to my body, I need to make melatonin. So as the sun is setting, as we move into darkness, your body is making melatonin. So we really ideally should be done eating by then. Like we should be eating dinner much earlier than we are eating. Same thing when we wake up in the morning. We shouldn't necessarily grab the cup of coffee, even if it's a bulletproof style coffee. We shouldn't be eating, breakfast first thing in the first couple of hours in the morning, because the body, once it sees the sunlight and it sees that it's day, it shuts down melatonin production. and it starts to stimulate cortisol. Your cortisol production will peak about 2 hours after you wake up. So I call these bookends. These are the times, 2 hours before you go to bed, 2 hours when you wake up. Let's not eat then. So now we can look at the eating window being more in the middle of the day.
Yeah, and so I guess it would make sense, because there's going to be seasonal variation in how much sunlight we have. Does a window flex, compress, and expand during the summer and winter months?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you go back and you think we're so primally designed. So in the winter time, our bodies are meant to be more in ketosis. We're meant to go into more of a hibernation place where we are not needing as much food. Because that's what the primal people did. They didn't have food access, so they relied on their ketogenic energy system to get them through the winter. So, but in the summer, we have these longer days, but also we're given more, nature provides us more food. There was more daylight hours for the cave people to go make a kill. So yeah, as it gets darker, this is where it gets a little more challenging. We really like lunch should be our big meal. And then as we move towards the darkness, we got to think about not eating. And that's where we get really messed up, because most people are not timing their meals around the seasons.
All right. So one of the things I've found very interesting in being in this community, I see that there's people that have differentials responses to different stimuli depending upon age, sex, demographics, how sedentary or active they are, but also some of the disease patterns. And you kind of touched on diabetics, but there's people that have autoimmune issues. There's people that have mental health issues, diabetes. Is there any way do you tailor things specifically differently based on the disease a person is dealing with? And if so, can you touch on some of those examples?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Well, let's go back to the research, because I find all length fasts, I find varying your fasts will help you overcome most chronic diseases. So let's start off with that. This is why I'm become obsessed with fasting, because everybody can do it. You don't need money to do it, and you just need to know how. And the research shows that it will help us overcome all chronic diseases. Okay, so that's the first premise. Now let's go to the most famous study that we have seen in the last couple of years. It was a meta-analysis, so it actually wasn't necessarily a study. It came out of the New England Journal of Medicine, December 2019, and they looked at over 1,500 peer-reviewed journals, and they decided that intermittent fasting was the absolute best way. They even went on to say it should be the first way for these conditions, for obesity, diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia, some cancers, not all cancers, primarily the hormonal cancer and colon cancers, MS, and pre and post surgery. They found that it was a helpful tool. So we can start by going, okay, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular health too. So metabolic syndrome, amen, absolutely. We have got to use fasting as our tool, but we can also use it for Alzheimer's, and we can use it for like MS and the surgery. So now when we dive deeper into the study, well, what did they do? So they took a 4-week period, and they started off by having them eat only in this 10-hour eating window. And within 4 weeks, they got them down into a 6-hour window. So you can go look at the study. They show the whole protocol there. And so within 4 weeks, they took people from a 10-hour eating window down to 6-hour. And that is what they are finding is the best for the conditions that I mentioned. Not difficult to do. You just got to train your body how to do it.
One of the issues, and you mentioned the OMAD stuff, and when you start getting these fairly narrow windows, some people struggle to consume enough food. They find that like I've got no problem. I can throw down 4 pounds of meat in one sitting, and I get plenty of it. And I require a lot of calories. I'm a big active person, but there are people that literally they're like, if I only eat 1 meal a day, and not that you're suggesting that, but I mean, is it something like if you're in a 6-hour window, you're going to have to eat 2 or 3 meals within that window? Or how do people manage to make sure that they get enough food so they aren't having hair falling out and all these things that sometimes come when you go?
Yeah, it's so another great question that you're going to really want to lean into nutrient dense food. And when you eat, you want to eat. This is why when people say calorie restriction, so especially in women and fasting, there's a lot of discussion around the fact that it's too much calorie restriction. But it's not calorie restriction, it's time restricted eating. So when you eat, you're going to need to eat, and you're going to need to eat good quality food if you're experiencing hair loss, or if you're experiencing, you're at the weight, you don't want to lose weight. This is why I love pairing something like the carnivore diet with fasting, because you're getting such nutrient dense food in that eating window. Now, beyond that, what I hear from a lot of people is, well, I'm not hungry, and this is probably the biggest challenge, because when we move over into this ketogenic energy system, ketones turn off hunger. So you are going to need to learn in your eating window how to eat the right foods, regardless of if you're hungry or not. And again, this is why meat is a great thing to pair with your fasting. Beyond that, we might have to look at some things like supplementation. So we live in the most mineral depleted time we have ever seen humans have. Our food is not being grown in soils that are rich in minerals. We've got so many chemicals in our environment that are blocking mineral receptor sites in cells. So you might have to add in a mineral supplement. Most of our fasters in my community do. So you might have to supplement a little bit more to get those extra nutrients, but you got to train yourself to eat in that window. And the more nutrient dense, the easier it will be for you.
We've got a question from Diane asking about, what about folks that are older? She says over 75. I mean, is there any contraindication for fasting for them, or do they need to do it differently than a 22-year-old, healthy athlete?
Yeah, no, so my dad just turned 85. My mom is turning 82 next month. And when we went into the pandemic, I was looking at what tools I could give them so that we could keep them as metabolically healthy as possible. So of course we gave them fasting. They're able to do 24-hour fasts quite easily. I've got them intermittent fasting every day. Haven't taken them through a 3-day water fast yet, but I think they would be up for it if I was coaching them through it. So really, no, if anything, it's an anti-aging technique. It's an immune system boost technique. So I like minding your numbers. Make sure you're, either get like one of those continuous glucose monitors and put it on the back on you, or get it like a Keto Mojo and just watch your numbers. You want to keep a good, personally, I feel a good fasting glucose is somewhere between 70 to 90. You don't want that blood sugar to dip too much, and you don't want your ketones to go up into like the 7s and the 8s. So you would want to kind of watch your blood sugar and ketones if you're going to go into the longer fast. But anything under 24, go for it. Like, now's the time to do it. You will be amazed at how, what I hear from our community is people feel younger, because those ketones are repairing those neurons in the brain that might be aging. They're bringing inflammation down. So it's an incredible tool for people in their senior years.
Yeah, you mentioned red light therapy. So a couple of asked, is there a specific type of red light that you're seeing more benefit with?
I wish I had a better pulse on that. I'm a little partial to Juve. That's the one I've just personally used. I've had a conversation with the founder of it, and there's great research behind red light, like, collagen production. If we just start there, women going through menopause, within the first 5 years of menopause, you lose 30% of your collagen. So doing it like on your face, doing it, around joints that might be hurting, speeding up injuries, that can be amazing. And the Juve is the one I use. I have a Go and I have a Mini, and I kind of move them around. Then, thyroid production, there's evidence, there's research showing that it improves thyroid health. And then the last one was testosterone. The study that Juve did was on male water polo players, and they had them just get out. When they got out of the pool, they stood in front of a full body red light for 10 minutes every day for 30 days, and their testosterone production went up. So I like Juve because they've done research. I've chatted with the owner. I don't know. I know there's cheaper ones, and I don't know if they're as efficient or as effective.
Yeah, I know the Juve guys. I used to, live near them, and we got one myself, and so I use that from time to time. I just move, so I have to set it up here. But Candace is asking about, what if you're underweight? Is fasting a problem, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's another great question. So here's the thing is, again, remember, think of if you're underweight or you're at your weight, think of fasting as healing. It's just like sleep. You are putting yourself in a healing state. So I would say most people are going to do just fine with some 15-hour, 17-hour fasts on a regular basis. But then when you eat, you're going to need to eat if you're underweight. So you need to up it the amount of food and the high quality of food. I know you guys, I would assume you're all carnivore lovers. This is why I love carnivore diet with fasting, because you're going to build muscle. You just are going to need to eat more of it than typical. The other thing about not wanting to lose weight is, remember, you don't have, you might throw in a couple of days a week where you don't fast. That would be okay. We're trying to mimic our primal ancestors. Sometimes they made a big kill and they had meat for days. Other times they didn't have any food. So the human body is designed to go into feasting and then into famine really well. So just make sure you're feasting enough.
Yeah, I like to use the term intermittent feasting because I was very good at that part of it. But let me
That's good.
let me ask you. You mentioned, you said your parents were, as people are rolling into a pandemic, you're concerned about metabolic health, which I think it's unfortunately been downplayed, the significance of the role, and particularly with the impact it does have on the immune system. So so let's say people are worried or concerned about getting sick, or maybe they've had a vaccination and they're worried about, maybe mitigating potential side effects. What sort of things are available to them, which you might recommend that might help with that?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me, because I'm trying to discuss this on public platforms as much as I can. But as you know, you get your hand slapped, you get by the big social media companies. So I actually have a video coming out. We're going to either put it out today or this weekend on this exact thing, but I'll give you guys the first glance at it here. Here's what the research says. When a virus comes into a cell that is a sugar burner, viruses do not have their own energy system. They have to live off of your energy system. So if you're eating all day and you're eating a high carb diet with bad oils, you're driving into Krispy Kreme donut to get your free donut, and you're going to do that a couple of times a day. When that virus comes in to your cells, you are going to magnify its energy, and you are going to give it an opportunity to replicate in your body. This is why we have not gotten out of this pandemic yet, because nobody is talking about this. This is called metabolic syndrome. This is called diabetes, because these cells are just soaking in sugar, and the virus comes in and is like, this is amazing, eats it all up and becomes more powerful and replicates more. So let's stop that. And I would agree with you. Like, why aren't we talking about this? This should have been step number one. Okay, so how do we avoid that? Well, what the research says, and this came out in October 2020, I put it out on a video on YouTube. I tried to craft how I said it so it didn't get censored, but it was literally in PubMed researched article showing that when a virus comes into a cell that is in a state of autophagy, it does not have it will not have any fuel to be able to replicate. It will literally come into the cell and it becomes weaker. So if we get our cells in autophagy and we get exposed to the virus, we might not even notice it because the virus doesn't have anything to replicate. It shuts down viral replication. So if you go to get the vaccine, the best thing you can do is go in in a fasted state so that your body is able to take that in and not have as strong of immune response. When people are having adverse reactions to the vaccine, a lot of it could be because they are in these sugar burner place. Now, if somebody around you gets the virus, get yourself in autophagy. If you are living with somebody, we have stories on our platform of whole families that got COVID, mothers that were in bed, like hugging their babies, like their children, like helping them through COVID, but they stayed in a state of autophagy while their family members had COVID, not one symptom. And I have story after story after story of that. So if you are around people, get in autophagy. If you're going to get the vaccine, get in autophagy. There has never been a more important time for us to get ourselves in autophagy. And we can talk about the 13 different variants that are coming out there in the world, but nothing's going to work until we get people out of poor metabolic health and teach them how powerful autophagy is for stopping viral replication. It's better than the statistics on the vaccine, which aren't even impressive in the first place.
Yeah, I think, the fact that we completely ignore host factors is I mean, that's half of the entire equation, and we're ignoring it completely, which is kind of crazy. Becky is asking about something. She says, do you suggest binders with fasting? And I'm not sure what she means by binders, but does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, it does. So when you go into autophagy, so again, every time I say autophagy, think of the cells are repairing. It starts with fasting at 17 hours. When you turn on that intelligence inside the cell, because we are so well designed, there is a mechanism inside the cell that often when autophagy gets stimulated, the intelligence goes, this cell is really bad. In fact, this cell could become a cancer cell. This cell could go rogue. I better kill it. And that's something called apoptosis. And when your body goes to kill these sick cells, these diseased cells, oftentimes what it will do is redistribute the chemicals, especially things like heavy metals, the man-made chemicals, the plastics. Our body doesn't know what to do with that. So when a cell dies, it just takes those chemicals and it redistributes them. So if you're doing a lot of autophagy, you're doing a lot of fasting, we recommend that you cycle in binders. So two of the best binders are activated charcoal. So just something as simple as taking a couple activated charcoal at night, just to make sure you're kind of cleaning up those binders. And then there's a zeolite. The one I use is a product called Cyto Detox. There's a couple of them out there, but zeolites will actually cross the blood-brain barrier and be able to get the toxins that are being released in places like the hippocampus that are protected by a blood-brain barrier. So that's what I believe is the binder question, is just making sure the more you fast, you may want to throw some of those two binders in.
Is there I guess there's a progression you mentioned, and I certainly see that, where if you just get into the habit, or every day you're going to do the exact same fast, your body's going to adapt to that eventually, and you're no longer going to get the, if you want to call it a hormetic effect, or you're going to get some of the changes. So changing up certainly makes sense. Is there a progression? If somebody comes to you and they're diabetic and obese and they've got depression and 3 or 4 other things going on, is there like a 1-year plan or something like that? How does that typically play out?
Yeah. So this is the way you kind of ease into it. Is the first step to fasting is pulling those 3 foods out I talked about. Like, get the toxic oils out, get the toxic carbs out, and get the toxic ingredients like red dyes and artificial colorings and flavorings. Like, just get all that crap out. So you start there. Now, the next step, and that could be a couple of days. It doesn't have to be long, but if you're nervous about fasting, start there. Then the second step is we want to take eating all day and we want to start to compress it. So push your breakfast back an hour and try that for a week. Try that for a couple weeks. Once that gets easy, then push it back another hour. And then see when it may be a little tough, you actually, to your hormetic stress comment is really important, because what you may want to do is, or may not realize, is you want to get a little uncomfortable. That's where the body's healing. So if you're 2 hours in and you're like, I don't know if I want to do this, hang in there, because the body is starting to learn to adapt. So you push the breakfast back an hour, push it back another hour. Within a couple of weeks, you should be able to get to about 13 to 15 hours of fasting. That is a really good, first fasting ledge. And now we've got those 3 ingredients out. We're fasting 13 to 15 hours. Maybe you're doing that for a month or 2. Okay, once that gets easy, now we need to pick 1 day a week that we extend our fasts. So I call it a 5-1-1 approach. So 5 days a week, intermittent fasting, 13 to 15 hours a day. 1 day a week, you start to stretch that fast. So you're trying to get yourself to 24 hours. And then 1 day a week, don't fast. Just have breakfast, mix it up so that the body never hits that plateau. And people can stay there for years or for months. And then when that is easy, then you're going to want to try a 36-hour once a quarter, try a 36-hour fast. When you're like, I can do that easy, then, you may throw in a 48. Once a year, you might try a 72. So once you get that foundation down, then you can move into these longer fasts and kind of play with them. But they're not meant, anything over 24 is really not meant to be done over and over and over again. You got to kind of splash those in depending on what you're trying to create in your body.
Yeah, this has been very fascinating and interesting. I unfortunately have to go do a consultation here in about 5 minutes. So I want to spend the last couple of minutes here. One, just let people, you mentioned you had a YouTube channel. Where are you located in the world, and tell people where they can find more about you and if they want to get more information.
Yeah. So my YouTube channel, I've got over 600 videos on fasting, all the research, I bring it there. So you can go there and binge watch everything I have there. On Instagram, I actually am doing answering people's questions in reels. So if you have a fasting question once a week, we'll put it in a Sunday post, put it in there. I create reels out of those. I go live there a lot. So I'm more interactive over there if you have fasting questions, but all the science and the application is on YouTube. And then if you forget all that, just go to drmindypelz.com. You'll find all my resources there.
All right, if you can answer this in 2 minutes, I don't know if you can. Somebody's asked me about Lyme disease and breaking up biofilms. Is there any quick sort of answer to that before I have to go?
Fasting won't break up biofilms, but it will help to regulate the immune system. But we don't have research on it breaking up biofilms yet. There are supplements that will, but fasting's not your tool for biofilms.
And I guess what supplements would those be, if just to help this person out?
You know what? Go to revelationhealth.com, and biocidin is one of the ones that I use. So just type in biocidin. They have all different kinds. If you put my last name in, they'll give you 10% off. And that would be the go-to place. That's my primary spot. And don't not fast. It's just it's not your tool for biofilms.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pelz. It's been a pleasure. If you wouldn't mind, maybe we'll get you back on, down the road to get an update on things, if that's okay. And thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
have an awesome day, guys.
All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you guys tomorrow. If not, have a good weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.